When the Seraphim's debut was first announced, the excitement was both immediate and massive. Ever since their announcement, they were one of the most highly anticipated debuts of the fourth generation of K-pop, and a huge part of that buzz came from the members themselves. Miyawaki Sakura, former member of the highly successful Mnet group ICE1, as well as the Japanese groups AKB48 and HKT48, Kim Chae-won, another former member of ICE1, Heo Yeon-jin, former contestant on Produce 48, the show that went on to form ICE1, and Nakamura Kazuha, a world-class ballerina scouted by HYBE and turned K-pop idol overnight, as well as two fresh faces added to the mix, Kim Garam and Hong Eun-chae. This wasn't just any debut, this was the debut. The Seraphim would not only be the first girl group to come out of Source Music since the third generation powerhouse G-Friend, they would also be the first girl group to be produced under HYBE labels, the corporation behind massive groups such as BTS, TXT, and ENHYPEN. Expectations for their debut were sky high, but the hype did not come without a cost. From the moment they made their debut, their rookie years were littered with multiple controversies. Minor issues coupled with full-blown scandals culminated in what I would consider one of, if not the, worst hate trains we've seen within K-pop in recent years. In this video, I want to take a closer look at what happened to the Seraphim, examine why the hate got as bad as it did, and present my view on much of the criticism they got. Because while I firmly believe that the relentless and intense hate they have received was never warranted, I also stand firm in my belief that a lot of the actual criticism they have faced was and remains valid, and I think it is important to look at the two as separate entities. So in this video, I want to dive into the many controversies LE SSERAFIM have faced ever since their debut and examine how what started out as very valid criticism ultimately turned into a full-blown hate train, unlike anything we've seen in K-pop in recent years. LE SSERAFIM finally made their highly anticipated debut on May 2nd, 2022, and it did astonishingly well. The music video for the title track Fearless broke 16 million views in the first 24 hours alone, and currently sits at over 150 million views. The mini-album reached over 350,000 pre-orders and went on to break the record for first-day sales for a girl group by selling over 175,000 copies on the first day alone. However, regardless of how well their debut did commercially, cracks had already started to form. In fact, they had been forming for a while already, ever since the members were revealed to the public. Kim Garam, the second youngest member of the Seraphim's debut lineup, was revealed on April 5th, 2022. After her reveal, it did not take long before rumors started circulating in online spaces, accusing Kim Garam of being an iljin, a Korean slang term used for school bullies. The allegations painted a picture of a middle school student who was aggressive and had participated in verbal and emotional bullying. The accusations were serious, but also purely anecdotal at the time, based only on social media posts and accounts from alleged former classmates. Nonetheless, the rumors did gain quite some traction, and HYBE and Source Music were quick to issue denials, stating that, quote, "Contrary to the claims, it was confirmed through a third-party statement that Kim Garam was a victim of school bullying, including malicious rumors and cyberbullying when she was in middle school," end quote. They insisted that she had never taken part in school bullying and stated that they would be taking legal action against anyone spreading such falsehoods. But the situation would only continue to worsen when on May 16th, a document surfaced online, allegedly from a South Korean school violence committee. The document indicated that Kim Garam had received a level 5 disciplinary action, which is a serious penalty, typically given in cases of physical and/or verbal abuse. The document also named the victim, Yoo Eun-seo, which only added gravity, credibility, and specificity to the case. Public backlash intensified overnight as the online sentiment turned sharply against Garam in light of this new information, and by extension, against the group as a whole. On May 20th, Source Music released an official statement announcing that Kim Garam would be taking a temporary hiatus from group activities. The statement also included further details about the situation, attempting to explain the circumstances around which the school violence committee was involved. But with no proof backing up their statement, public opinion remained firmly against Garam. So it did not come as much of a surprise when 2 months later, the company confirmed her permanent departure from the group. Kim Garam's contract with Source Music was terminated, and the Seraphim were to continue as a 5-member group. The timing of this controversy honestly could not have been worse, as it coincided with a wider cultural reckoning within South Korea regarding school violence. In the period from 2020 to 2022, the K-pop industry experienced what I can only describe as a wave of bullying accusations. Multiple idols were accused of past misconduct, with some cases substantiated and some disproven. Some notable examples are Hyunjin from Stray Kids, Soojin of G-Idol, Mingyu from 17, Jimin of AOA, the entirety of the group April, and many, many more. This created an atmosphere where the public was far more willing to scrutinize and condemn idols accused of school bullying. In South Korea, bullying and incidents of school violence is treated with more seriousness than what we see in a lot of Western countries, and considering idols are expected to uphold moral integrity and good character, these kinds of rumors can be career-ending, which in Garam's case, it was. The biggest and most persistent controversy regarding the sserafim has, ever since their debut, been the narrative that they simply cannot sing. The scrutiny started right as they first stepped onto the K-pop scene and is what ultimately tipped the scale into the vicious hate train that we can look back on today. So let us start at the beginning. In their debut era, Le Sserafim, amidst the ongoing troubles with their lineup, did perform as normal on music shows, with both the title track Fearless and one of their B-sides, Blue Flame. As is pretty normal for rookie groups these days, they did sing live in some of their stages, but a majority of them were pre-recorded. For Fearless, these 3 stages were live while the rest were pre-recorded, and for Blue Flame, all of their performances were pre-recorded. While it was nowhere near as pronounced or widespread as what we've seen more recently, Le Sserafim's live performances during their debut era were scrutinized on multiple occasions. Most notably, their encores were looked at through a very critical lens, and one live performance in particular was dragged through the mud. Their Music Bank performance on May 27, 2022 was heavily criticized. Netizens criticized the group for overall weak live singing and lack of stability, pointing out their struggles to stay on pitch, obvious issues with breath control, and struggles to hit high notes. I'm going to get more into a technical analysis of their vocals at a later point in this video, but I just have to say here, while we're on the topic of the Music Bank performance, that this is not a good representation of their singing whatsoever. The main problem with this performance is that their mics were turned up way too high. You should not, as long as a headset mic is placed correctly, be able to hear every breath and mouth sound the way you do in that performance. And I think that made the singing sound much worse and much more unstable than it actually was. But it doesn't change the fact that the criticism was there, and it was but a hint at what was to come. What was seen as vocal shortcomings became ammunition for the broader public, and especially fans of quote-unquote competing groups, to attack the group and start tearing them down from the get-go. What didn't help were the inevitable comparisons, as criticism towards the Seraphim's vocals would only intensify when people started comparing them to other girl groups. An apt example is NMIXX, who debuted the same year and were praised almost unanimously for their live vocals, with not only main and lead vocalists who were capable of delivering skillful high notes and complex harmonies, but also generally very high quality vocals for all members of the groups. NMIXX is one of the groups of the 4th generation that have set a high bar for rookie performances, a bar Le Sserafim really have never seemed equipped to reach. Perhaps even more unforgiving were the comparisons to G-Friend, Source Music's previous girl group. With a reputation built on precise synchronization, difficult choreography, and vocal consistency, G-Friend's live performance skill were seen as a key part of their legacy. Debuting Le Sserafim under the same label came with built-in expectations, whether they liked it or not. Expectations that the members of Le Sserafim simply were not yet ready to meet. In this context, Le Sserafim's perceived vocal shortcomings made them feel, to some, both underprepared and overhyped. Leaving the rocky debut era behind, Le Sserafim made their first comeback on October 17, 2022, with their second EP Anti-Fragile and the title track bearing the same name. Anti-Fragile went on to do even better than Fearless, selling over 1 million copies and securing the group their first ever entry onto the Billboard 200 chart. They went on to promote Anti-Fragile as well as the B-side Impurities on various music shows, but notably, not a single performance featured live vocals. I have watched and rewatched every single music show performance from this era, and I cannot confidently say that any of them were the slightest bit live. The only stages that might hint at having live vocals would be the Mnet comeback show stages, but I strongly believe it's just very strategic pre-recording. Furthermore, while they did win first place on music shows 5 times total, they were not present to perform the encore live for any of these broadcasts, resulting in a promotional cycle completely void of any and all live vocals. Looking back, I honestly believe this was one of the worst decisions Source Music could have made for the image of the group. Criticism of Le Sserafim's vocals did calm down during this era, but not because they improved, simply because there were no live vocals to comment on. Completely eliminating live vocals from the promotional cycle simply reinforced a narrative that had been spreading online. Le Sserafim were performers first, singers second. With Unforgiven, Le Sserafim returned with their first full-length album on May 1st, 2023. The comeback was once again a commercial success, solidifying their style musically and visually, but it also brought back the public scrutiny at full force. Because while the album was well received, the conversation did quickly shift to more contentious matters, namely their live performances. This era was the Seraphim's most consistent attempt at singing live, where Anti-Fragile era saw no live performances and Fearless had a total of 3 stages I'm confident in saying were live. Their promotional stages for Unforgiven were for the most part live. They promoted the title track Unforgiven and they sang at least partially live in all of these stages. They also promoted 2 of their B-sides. Eve Psyche and the Bluebeard's Wife saw these 2 stages with live vocals, and No Return Into the Unknown saw these stages with live vocals. Vocally, I think their performances were absolutely fine. Nothing disastrous, but also nothing outstanding. The 3 songs they promoted all had relatively strenuous choreography, with jumping, high energy, and in general, movements that don't really lend themselves well to preserve vocal stability. As an example, this part in Eve Psyche and the Bluebeard's Wife, Eunchae is going from standing to laying down. You cannot realistically expect the voice to be 100% unaffected by that. So with all of that in mind, I really don't think their vocal performance for the live stages of this era were bad at all. But the era did not pass by without criticism, and once again their encores were a point of scrutiny. Most notably, their encore on SBS The Show on May 9th was torn apart, but their other encores were not safe from criticism either. Fans especially harped on Sakura, expressing their disappointment for how an idol who had been in the industry for 10 years was struggling with basic pitch and breath support. And Eunchae and Kazuha were also frequently pointed out as having bad vocal presence during encores. I do not know when encores became the end-all be-all for vocal analysis in K-pop, but we've seen it more and more prominently during the last few years. While I can see the logic behind it, with no choreography, which means no distractions, and nothing impacting breath control so that the vocals are front and center, I also think the expectations have become unrealistic very quickly. Most idols do not wear their in-ear monitors during encores, making it harder for them to hear themselves and thus harder to stay in tune. You can add to that minimal to no time to warm up, nerves, and in some cases just pure exhaustion, and things can understandably go wrong even when the choreography is eliminated. So while I definitely think there is some validity to encore criticism, I think it has become widely exaggerated. It never has and never will be quite the same as a proper stripped live stage performance. But whether you want to put a lot of weight on encores or not, it does not change the fact that the scrutiny was present. Their emphasis on live vocals during stages for this era did little to counteract the existing narrative, that Le Sserafim were simply not qualified to sing live. Just to keep the timeline straight, after Unforgiven, they went on to release their first English single, Perfect Night, on October 27th the same year. This song was a massive success, and as far as the debate and controversy regarding their vocals, this didn't do anything to add fuel to the fire, nor did it do anything to negate the existing narrative. So we're just gonna move right along. Le Sserafim then kicked off 2024 with their 3rd mini-album Easy, featuring the title track of the same name, released on February 19th. I will for now only be focusing on the controversies surrounding their vocals that came with this era, but Easy era was a wild ride, so I will get into some other points of criticism in the next section. They went on to perform multiple of their songs on music shows, namely the title track Easy, as well as 2 B-sides, Smart and Swan Song. Most of the performances during this era did feature live vocals, but for pretty much all of their stages, the backing track is so loud that you can barely hear the live vocals whatsoever. For the title track, pretty much every stage features an overpowering backtrack, with their 2 performances on Inkigayo being the only ones where you can really hear any live vocals. For Smart, once again, the Inkigayo performance are the only ones where you can really hear them live. And lastly, for Swan Song, I do believe there's live vocals in most of their performances, but the only ones you can really hear them in is once again Inkigayo. A rare live vocal slay for Inkigayo, if I do say so myself. But they did win first place multiple times on multiple different music shows, and encores did of course follow. They were neither any worse nor any better than what we saw during Unforgiven, so the discussion and criticism really stayed within the same realm, but now with further examples added of what netizens deemed to be bad vocals. On the other hand, you also had a lot of fans coming to the girls' defense, claiming that the song was harder to sing as it was quite low and quote, not in their range. I personally do not think this is a good argument whatsoever, but I will get back to that when we dive deeper into vocal analysis in a later part of the video. Overall, Easy era saw the same criticisms as the previous era, but what made this one really stand out were all the extra, smaller scale controversies that the era brought with it. While the entire Les Sserafim Can't Sing controversy has hands down been the biggest point of criticism throughout their time as a group, and we will come back to it once again in the next section, there has also been a number of smaller scale controversies sprinkled in between. So it is time for a rapid fire roundup. Sticking with Easy Era for the time being, the music video for the title track came under fire for featuring shots of the members dancing in a church, and the overall reception of this was quite split. While a lot of fans saw nothing overtly offensive with the imagery used, other fans did take offense to what they saw as a disrespect of religion. The main problem was the girls' outfit and the choreography performed, as well as certain sacred imagery within the church being replaced by a Les Sserafim logo. I'm not Christian, I'm not religious at all, so I can't really speak on whether this is offensive or not, it is not my place, but some fans were offended by the imagery used and they are entitled to that opinion. Regardless, this discourse did mainly stay online and it was more of a flicker than a real fire. During the showcase for Easy, member Yoonjin came under fire for wearing what netizens deemed to be an inappropriate outfit. She appeared on stage in a crop top paired with ultra-low-rise shorts that showed off her underwear, a look some fans argued bordered on lingerie rather than appropriate performance wear. This was not an isolated incident, however, as both Yoonjin and Chaewon just a month prior both came under fire for their outfits in the Good Bones trailer, which netizens once again deemed too revealing. Fans were questioning why the members were being dressed in what looked to be only their underwear, raising alarm about the group's image becoming overly sexualized. This controversy once again largely remained within K-net circles, but it was still one more controversy to add to the ever-growing list. We are not done with Easy Era yet though, because their B-side Smart also came under fire. First off, they were accused of cultural appropriation and using a black scent in the song. Netizens specifically found issue with the way they pronounced smarter as smata and also with some of the imagery used within the music video. The song was also accused of plagiarism at one point, with fans pointing out alleged similarities between Smart and the song Water by Tyla. I personally didn't hear it then and I still really don't, but it did gain some attention back when the point was first brought up. Overall, at least from what I saw online and within the fandom at the time, neither of these points of contention ended up as big controversies, but at this point it seemed that any and everything the Sserafim did would be criticized one way or another. Furthermore, they also received criticism for the choreography for Smart, specifically in regards to Eunche, who was still a minor when the song was released. Many fans expressed how they found the pre-chorus in particular to be inappropriate, and this was also not the first time the group was criticized for quote-unquote inappropriate choreography in regards to their youngest members. Already in their debut music video, they were heavily criticized for a part of the choreography that had all the members on the floor, especially in regards to the youngest members who were minors at the time. And more recently, Perfect Night's choreography also garnered criticism for what fans deemed to be inappropriate choreography. All in all, this was really nothing new for the group in particular, but it added to the list of what would become their most turbulent era yet. Jumping back in time a little bit, because the controversies are far from limited to Easy Era, Les Sserafim, or more appropriately their label Hybe, came under fire during their debut era when they were accused of manipulating the points to secure Les Sserafim a win on a music show. On the KBS Music Bank episode aired on May 13, 2022, Les Sserafim secured a win against opponent Im Young-eun, despite Im Young-eun's song having been overwhelmingly ahead in digital scores. During the announcement of the winners, Les Sserafim received a broadcast score of well over 5,000, while Im Young-eun received 0, ultimately securing Les Sserafim the win. Fans were quick to point out that it really made no sense that Im Young-eun's broadcast score would be 0, and it got to a point where a full-on police investigation was started looking into potential rigging. It took 10 whole months for the matter to be settled, and the points were indeed confirmed to be correct. But by the time the matter was settled, fans had in large part moved on and made up their mind. Despite the fact that if there had been any rigging involved in the episode, the responsibility and blame would be on Hybe and/or KBS, Les Sserafim were the ones to receive major backlash for this whole ordeal, as it coincided with all of the other controversies that their incredibly rocky debut era brought with it. Going back to more recent topics, we are going to have to talk about the Starbucks incident. In the midst of ongoing boycotts of multiple large brands and corporations seen as complicit in the ongoing Israel-Palestine war, Yoonjin was photographed drinking Starbucks in March 2024. Starbucks was widely criticized during this time for allegedly shutting down support for Palestine and penalizing workers for expressing such support. So while they never directly supported Israel, at least monetarily, they faced immense backlash and by proxy became part of the wider ongoing boycott. However, this nuance was straight up ignored when it came to K-pop idols who got caught drinking Starbucks around this time. As the photograph quickly spread online, Yoonjin became a target for even more criticism, accused of being everything from tone deaf to straight up politically ignorant. The way I see it, with both Yoonjin and any other K-pop idol who found themselves in similar situations, fans were quick to jump on the hate bandwagon, as it gave them a chance to appear, for lack of a better word, woke. In my opinion, the way K-pop fans took the Starbucks boycott and blew it completely out of proportions is performative activism at its finest. But that doesn't negate the fact that it was hurtful to both the idols caught in the crossfire and the respective groups. Sticking with Yoonjin, who seemed to really have become netizens' own personal punching bag at this time, she was also criticized for her collaboration with the Western artist Max. Around the time his song Stupid in Love featuring Yoonjin was released, past tweets of his started resurfacing. The tweets in question were racist, sexist, and fetishizing East Asians and Koreans in particular. These tweets only surfaced after the collaboration was confirmed and actively happening, and it had nothing to do with Yoonjin personally. But at this point, fans saw her as guilty by association and ran with it. Once again, this was really not the biggest thing, and the general consensus I did see online at the time was that it was unfortunate, but seeing as it resurfaced while the collab was actively going on, it really wasn't a reflection on Yoonjin and her character, and thus it did blow over relatively quickly. The point of this section is to illustrate how the sserafim really found themselves in a never-ending cycle of criticism, scrutiny, and over-analysis where even the most minor missteps were magnified and added to the ever-growing list. They had no room to recover, no pause long enough to reset, as each new wave of discourse somehow built on the last, and it became near impossible to separate any fair critique from irrelevant noise. Any break between controversies was simply not long enough to allow the public to forgive and forget, and it created the perfect storm where perception solidifies before progress can take root. And the worst was unfortunately yet to come. The biggest controversy of LE SSERAFIM's career came in the wake of their performance at Coachella 2024 on April 13th and April 20th. From the moment their appearance on the festival was announced, concerns began circulating due to the group's history of vocal inconsistency. Coachella is really known for prioritizing live vocals, and fans were concerned that LE SSERAFIM simply were not ready to perform at this kind of stage. Let us get this out of the way right here. Coachella does not have a ban on backtrack and/or lip syncing. I don't know where that rumor started. I've seen it repeated many a time, especially among K-pop fans, but it is simply just a rumor. However, live vocals are highly prioritized and quite frankly expected of all of the acts performing at the festival, but there is no outright ban in place. Okay, glad we got that cleared up. LE SSERAFIM made their Coachella debut on the outdoor stage on April 13th in front of a sizable live audience and an even larger online audience. Their 10-song set, lasting about 40 minutes, was really well received by said audience. People who were at Coachella and witnessed it live praised the group for their high energy, their interactions with the crowd, and their overall stage presence, and the reception of the performance from the live audience was relatively warm. But as soon as fan cams and recordings of their performance started making the rounds online, a very different narrative soon took over. Because in the recordings, you can very clearly hear that the vocals are, unfortunately, not great. Already from the very first song in their set, Anti-Fragile, things were undeniably shaky. The members sounded like they were out of breath, they seemed to struggle to stay on pitch and reach high notes, and lines that should have been delivered with power and control really came out as straight up shouting. Even Yoonjin and Taewon, the two members who have consistently been held as the group's strongest vocalists, seemed to struggle to maintain consistency. The undoubtedly biggest problem was them not singing in the correct pitch, and the high notes being either flat or entirely out of tune. Notably, there was little to no backtrack during their week 1 performance, so pretty much everything we hear is indeed their live vocals. I want to take a second to acknowledge here as well the difference between a festival performance, especially at a festival like Coachella, compared to a music show performance or even a regular concert performance. The whole vibe of a festival makes for an entirely different experience, and the parameters for the performance is entirely different. So I will give LE SSERAFIM credit where credit is due. They did bring the energy and the stage presence needed to fill that Coachella stage. And regardless of their vocals not being the best, I will commend them for keeping the mics on and singing live for the entire set with little to no backtrack. It would have been much easier for them to at least partially rely on a backtrack, so I will absolutely commend them for the effort it took to not do that. But regardless of any commendable aspect of the performance, backlash for the lacking aspects were equally swift and brutal to what we have seen previously with Le Sserafim. Within literal minutes of the performance ending, fan cams and recordings started circulating on social media, quickly racking up millions of views. And unfortunately for the group, the clips that gained the most attention were the ones showcasing their worst vocal moments. This only confirmed what fans had already expressed prior to the girls entering the stage. They were simply not ready for this kind of performance. If this had been a one-time problem, they no doubt would still have faced a lot of backlash, but it could have been chalked up to nerves or having an off day. However, as we know, this was far from the first time they had fumbled vocally, and it did nothing to help the already widespread notion that Le Sserafim as a group simply did not care to prioritize vocals. Popular tweets and comments across social media branded the performance as, quote, painful to listen to and, quote, the worst Coachella performance ever. What made it even worse were the inevitable comparisons to other K-pop groups who had performed at Coachella. Most notably, Blackpink, the first group to perform at Coachella and also headline, and ATEEZ, who performed in 2024 as well, to generally a much better reception. Fast forward to week 2, Le Sserafim re-entered the Coachella stage on April 20th, showcasing notable improvement from their performance during week 1. In general, the members did not seem to be struggling as much with breathlessness, and the shouting was toned down, though still present at some points. Their high notes were delivered with a lot more stability, and overall, the vocal performance was just higher during this performance than it was during week 1. However, they also notably included a backtrack during this performance. A backtrack that at times was so loud it overpowered the live vocals, and they did end up facing lip sync allegations after the fact. Personally, I highly doubt that the entire week 2 performance is lip sync, just based on recordings I've seen, but certain parts do indeed have backing so loud there is no live vocal to be heard. Regardless of improvement, the damage was already done. The more balanced response to the week 2 performance simply could not overpower the sheer virality of the backlash after week 1. Any improvement was largely ignored by the broader general public. The narrative was already set, as the internet had already editorialized any clips from their performance into a cautionary tale. A cautionary tale of what happens when performance hubris clashes headfirst with vocal reality. By the end of the festival, the debate around Le Sserafim's vocals reached a new high, and they found themselves at the forefront of a larger discussion within K-pop as a genre regarding the current trajectory of K-pop live performance standards. The criticism really went beyond dragging and nitpicking, which we see way too often among K-pop fans, and became more of a referendum on whether new K-pop groups were being pushed onto global stages before they were ready. The fear that visuals and stage presence and the ever-mysterious star quality were being valued over actual musical competency had been circulating ever since the end of the third generation and start of the fourth. And the Seraphim, with their repeated shortcomings despite coming from such a massive company, became the unfortunate poster child for this sentiment. So let's actually talk about their vocals. Usually, this is where you would find a disclaimer saying I'm not a singer, not a vocal coach, this is all my uneducated opinion, etc. Except I am a singer, and I have worked as a vocal coach. I'm by no means the end-all be-all, but I've been professionally trained for the better part of the last 15 years, so when I'm now going to talk about vocal technique, it is not nitpicking or guessing, it's me offering my perspective based on actual experience and training. Okay, let's get into it. Regardless of whether you personally think it takes away from the overall performance or not, there really is no question that the vocals they showcased during their performance at Coachella were poor by any standard. And as I mentioned earlier, we can't really chalk it up to nerves, fatigue, or simply having a bad day, as Le Sserafim has time and time again showcased the same issues in various different settings. By this point, prioritizing performance over vocals had become a pattern for them. Starting off more broadly, none of Le Sserafim songs are particularly hard to sing, but I have repeatedly seen fans regurgitate the narrative that their songs are, quote, not in their register. That is blatantly false, as most members have shown ranges corresponding with that of sopranos and or mezzo-sopranos. None of their notes are even close to alto ranges, and with proper technique, it shouldn't be a problem for them to hit and sustain these notes. It is, however, much harder to sustain a note in the lower part of your register when you are out of breath, compared to belting a note in a higher part of your register. To give you an example, and I apologize for the singing jump scare you're about to hear, in their song Easy, the line that goes, "Damn, I really make it look easy," is much harder to sustain when you are out of breath compared to, as an example, the first line of the chorus of Hot. I'm burning hot, 내가 너로 살 수 있다면. The line from easy will require more breath support and more control to hit the correct pitch and sing it with appropriate projection and power, compared to the line from hot, which, while it will sound better when proper technique is applied, can be forced by, for lack of a better description, forcing the air out and thus also the sound. And that is where the main problem lies with their performance at Coachella. They left any and all technique behind. Their breath support was seemingly forgotten backstage, replaced by straight up shouting and pressing the sound out on notes that you simply cannot force without going off pitch. The way I see it, breath control has been a consistent issue for multiple members of sserafim ever since their debut. That was the big issue with the Fearless stage that was so heavily criticized, and Sakura, Kazuha, and Eunchae have all had moments, especially during encores, where they don't seem to be in control of their breath. So my question really is, why hasn't HYBE, arguably the biggest K-pop company as of right now, invested in proper coaches for these girls? Especially with the backlash they've faced, even way before Coachella, they should have hired the best of the best vocal coaches in order to learn and apply the much needed techniques and thus avoid further scandal and criticism for the same old issues. I'm of the firm belief that anyone, and I mean literally anyone, can learn to sing well. Some people are obviously gifted with talent and have an easier time learning, and some people have more unique and pleasant vocal tones than others, but with training, literally anyone can learn to sing in the right pitch and sustain a note. We cannot all be Yuju, we cannot all be Wendy, but that is also not the requirement. Nobody who is criticizing the sserafim for their vocals is expecting all 5 members to suddenly become main vocals overnight. We are simply expecting each member to be able to hold their own, which, as they showcased especially well during Coachella, they at this point in time could not do. It is time for the inevitable comparisons to earlier generations because I am a 3rd gen stan to the very core of my being, and I will use any excuse to bring the 3rd generation up. If you look at popular 3rd gen groups, without going into specifics, it is not uncommon for them to have 1 or 2 very, very talented vocalists as lead and or main, and the rest of the group all take the sub-vocal positions or rapper positions. What is notable is that in most of these groups, the sub-vocals are still very much capable singers, and the same can be said for potential rappers of the group as well. Whereas with the sserafim in particular, the group had, up until Coachella, sailed along on the vocal capabilities of Yunjin and Chaewon. And when they weren't able to deliver up to standard, it became glaringly obvious how lacking the group's vocal powers really were. When it comes to the problems the members seem to be having with singing in the correct pitch, I unfortunately do not have an explanation for why that happened. There can really be a variety of explanations, ranging from issues with the technical equipment to actual issues with their vocal technique. So I can't really diagnose the cause of the issue from afar, and thus I can't give you an answer as to how they should have fixed it, but I will say, pitch issues, if they are indeed related to vocal technique, are some of the hardest issues to fix for a singer. So there's that. The last point I want to touch upon is register control, particularly in regards to their mixed voice and their falsetto, which they, in my opinion, seem to be struggling with during the Coachella performance. Starting with Yunjin and Chaewon, they seem to rely very heavily, almost entirely, on their chest voice, even during moments when it would have been more appropriate to go into a mixed voice. This kind of strain often leads to strained or even cracked high notes, which we saw multiple times with both members. Instead of blending their chest and head voice to a more supported, comfortable mix, they seemed to power through with that brute force that I was talking about earlier, and the vocal cracks we heard were simply a natural consequence. As for the remaining 3 members, their most apparent issue to me comes with the use of their falsetto. In sections where they sing in falsetto, they come across as extremely breathy and very underpowered. Essentially, it sounds to me like they are pushing air out more than they are producing actual sound, which might hint at a larger issue of an underdeveloped falsetto register altogether. The good news is, this is all easily fixable. Once again, it comes down to training. With the help of a good vocal coach, you can learn techniques that allow you to effortlessly flip between register, develop each register individually, and of course, apply proper breath support throughout it all. At the end of the day, I do not think the Seraphim's issue is that they simply cannot sing at all. It is rather a matter of not being taught how to sing with proper technique, especially under pressure or in high intensity and high energy settings. So I once again ask, why were they not given this proper training prior to their debut? And why did it take a full-blown scandal for them to actually do something? Now, maybe some of you think that this section of actual vocal critique is redundant, unnecessary. Maybe you skipped right ahead to the next controversy altogether because you don't care. I don't know. That is all your prerogative. But I think the way sserafim as a group, from a multi-billion-dollar company who obviously has the funds to hire any and everyone needed to improve these girls' vocals, have skirted by with, at times, pardon my language, piss-poor vocals, is detestable. Because if they, who really have any resource available to them, are given a free pass to not hit their notes and repeatedly show zero improvement, what precedent does that set for the future of K-pop? I am not, and I never will be, demanding flawless vocals at all times. That is simply unrealistic. And I'm also not going to fault anyone for having a bad day every once in a while. But when it is a consistent problem persisting for the better part of 2 to 3 years, it becomes a larger issue, and in my opinion, deserving of criticism. Maybe you don't care about K-pop vocals, but I do. At the end of the day, behind the sparkly facade of overly complicated choreography, flawlessly styled outfits, and extremely beautiful faces, K-pop is, at its core, music. And we have been steadily heading down a road where the actual vocals are neglected for quite a while now. When inconsistency or poor singing becomes the norm and the industry as a whole simply shrugs it off, we lose a critical part of what makes K-pop so unique, namely the delicate balance of artistry, performance, and vocal craft. Let's get back to the controversies because we are unfortunately not quite out of the woods yet. With the backlash and criticism of their Coachella performance on week 1 having become as bad as it did, the members really had no choice but to address it. Unfortunately, the way they went about that would only make things worse. Sakura went to Weverse on April 15th after their week 1 performance and ahead of their week 2 performance and posted a letter to Fear Not expressing her thoughts on the performance and the backlash. I will be reading you some highlights, some sections are paraphrased, but the full post will be linked down below if you want to read it for yourself. The letter started out addressing their performance, reflecting on what it means to put on a good show. Is it about showing the perfect side? Is it about entertaining the audience? Or is it about performing without being allowed to make a single mistake? She went on to explain how they prepared a lot for the stage, wanting to make it an unforgettable experience for the people in the audience, and how at the end of it all, they were satisfied with their performance. It's been less than 2 years since we debuted, and we've only done 1 tour, so we have put all our heart and soul into this Coachella stage. No one is perfect. It is an unwavering fact that this was the best performance we have ever shown. She ended the letter expressing how they would keep working hard for week 2, asking fans to focus on the good rather than the bad, and thanking Fear Nots for their support. To say that this letter wasn't well received would be a huge understatement. While the message was clearly intended to comfort, it struck a very different chord with a large portion of the broader public, and even within the fandom itself, reactions were divided. Among the Seraphim's core fans, Sakura's letter was seen as a show of emotional resilience. Many fans praised her for her ability to stay positive during the overwhelming criticism. They took it as a reminder to not be consumed by hate, negativity, and fan wars, and commended Sakura for protecting her mental health and for keeping morale high within the group. But the fans left with this impression were unfortunately the minority. Among the broader K-pop audience, the letter was received quite differently. Critics argued that the message came off as tone-deaf, self-congratulatory, and ultimately completely dismissive of what was valid concern. Rather than acknowledging the actual shortcomings of the group in performance and signaling a willingness to improve, the way Sakura urged fans to focus on the positive was seen as a deflection and a refusal to engage with warranted criticism. For many, this signaled a mindset of complacency where personal feelings take precedence over professional standards. Fans and casual listeners alike found themselves questioning how one of the most popular rookie groups of their generation could in good faith walk away from this calling it their best stage ever, when even the most dedicated fans saw themselves acknowledging that the vocals were indeed lacking. This did spark a wider conversation about accountability. Just how much grace should we as fans extend to artists when they fall short? And for positivity in particular, there is a fine line between it being empowering and it laying the groundwork for avoidance. And according to critics, Sakura's letter crossed that line, especially considering that she is the most experienced member of the group with over 10 years as a J-pop and K-pop idol under her belt. Fans expected a degree of professionalism and self-awareness that simply were not present in this letter. This divide and also criticism was only made worse when the Seraphim's documentary, Make It Look Easy, was released. In one of the episodes, Sakura is shown crying while working on her vocals, admitting that she had become afraid to sing in front of others and struggled with feelings of inadequacy. While this was sad to watch, and it is sad that the criticism and hate got so bad she seemingly lost faith in herself altogether, the reception to the documentary would only further split fans' opinion of how the group handled the criticism they got. Sparking a wave of sympathy from core fans, it also solidified what the broader K-pop audience had been suspecting pretty much from debut. They simply had not received adequate training, and the criticism they were now facing was but a natural consequence of their shortcomings. But this is also where things get extremely messy. What started as valid criticism of the group's performance swiftly turned into vicious hate towards the members. While the members of the Seraphim had been facing criticism for a while prior to this, Coachella and the response of the members marked what I deemed to be the starting point for one of the worst hate trains we've seen in K-pop in recent years. The straight-up harassment the girls faced on social media led to the comments being turned off on all of their social media accounts in July of 2024. The comments in question included anything from attacks on the members' looks and abilities to actual death threats. It went so far away from anything constructive and turned into outright hatred at a breakneck pace. See, what I attempted to present in the previous section is constructive criticism. I'm pointing out an issue that is not a personal attack on any of the members and it can actually be worked on. Saying that X member is talentless, or worst of all, threatening to alive someone, that is not constructive criticism, that is just straight up insane behavior. And obviously, this had an effect on the members. The consistent wave of criticism turned hate that they faced throughout their entire career, which reached its undeniable peak after Coachella, has made it near impossible for the group to build a stable, positive public image. And it is hard to imagine that this kind of treatment from fans and the broader K-pop audience wouldn't take a toll on the members' mental health. As mentioned, we did see the way it affected Sakura's belief in her own abilities. And more recently, in April of 2025, Yoonjin gave a heartfelt speech during their first stop on their new tour, addressing the emotional impact of the backlash. She shared that at one point, she worried if there even was a future for the group, and reflected on how the past few years had indeed been emotionally challenging for the group. Fortunately, now, after 2 stronger comebacks, they have been met with noticeably improved public perception. While the scars of the past undoubtedly remain, there is a growing sense that the public perception of the Seraphim may be shifting, albeit slowly, to a more balanced and supportive perspective. The Seraphim's comeback with their 4th EP Crazy and the title track of the same name marked a noticeable shift, not necessarily musically, but definitely in how the group was received by the public. The girls performed both the title track and one of their B-sides, 1-800 Hot and Fun, on music shows, and while the reactions were still mixed in some areas, any hate they received during this era was but a fraction of what they had endured in the past. From this era on, we began to see the public perception of the group finally shifting, at least a little bit. Let us start with Crazy. This title track took on a bolder sound, with EDM and house influence, distorted synths, and an almost chaotic edge. The song was quite possibly their most divisive title track yet, in terms of actual music style. But while the song might have been divisive musically, the era itself was more unanimously dubbed as the start of a vocal redemption arc. Online, the girls were widely praised by fans for showcasing what was dubbed as live vocals completely without a backing track. I unfortunately do not subscribe to that. In my semi-professional but not really professional at all opinion, the stages for Crazy were in large, not live. Let me explain before you crucify me in the comments. I do think their mics were on, but for the most part, it is like 98-ish% backtrack and maybe 2% live. You can clearly hear things like claps and even at times subtle bumps on the microphone, which tells us that the microphones are indeed on. And I think this, coupled with the heavy breathing being heard and vocals not being as perfect as we're used to on backtracks, is what convinced so many fans that this is indeed 100% live. However, there are a few things that make me believe it is, in large, just a very cleverly done pre-recording. First of all, the breathing. While audible breaths usually are seen as an indicator of live vocals, the breaths that we hear in the Crazy performances is the exact same for every single stage. If you layer the sound of multiple stages over each other, it is one track, not multiple. But the breathing is also not consistent throughout the performance. As an example, in the All the Girls Are Girling part and the Act Like an Angel, Dress Like Crazy parts, those parts are lip-synced, and it's made obvious you're meant to know that they're lip-synced if the microphones are placed in a way that picks up breaths so well when they're singing. We should also hear those breaths when they are not singing. And my second point, the vocal inconsistencies. I believe the vocals are left imperfect to make them sound live, but again, these imperfections are the same in every single stage. That is not only highly improbable, it is pretty near impossible. There are only 2 stages where I think you can actually pinpoint audible live vocals, and even then, it is only audible in Yoonjin and Chaewon's part. I could literally go on forever talking about this. There are more points that I could give you to back up my opinion, but in my opinion, the Crazy stages were not as live as they were praised for being. They're just very cleverly executed. Obviously, I could be wrong. I don't think I am, but it's always a possibility. There were also no live encores for this era, so there are no clear live vocals undisturbed by choreography for this era either. They did also perform their B-side 1-800-Hot and Fun, which arguably had a broader mainstream appeal. It's a fun, pop-rock, party-esque track entirely in English, and every performance I could find for this featured live vocals. Admittedly, the microphones are very low, so you can barely hear the members, but especially during Yoonjin and Chaewon's parts in the verses, you can hear a live voice behind the backtrack. To illustrate my point, if you look at this particular Mewbang performance, you can hear how low Yoonjin's microphone is in the beginning when she is talking. That is the level the microphones are on for all members for all stages of this era. Regardless of my opinion on the liveness of the crazy stages, this era achieved exactly what the group hoped that it would, a subtle reset in public perception. With the vicious criticism of the previous eras having calmed down significantly during this era, and thus also the hate, it seemed like things were finally beginning to look up for the girls. And that brings us right up to LE SSERAFIM's most recent comeback with their 5th EP, Hot, released on March 14th, 2025. The title track Hot featured sultry vocal delivery influenced by genres like funk and R&B. While it's not necessarily a difficult song to sing, it featured less talk singing than a lot of other LE SSERAFIM title tracks, and it worked really well to actually showcase the girls' strengths. They performed both the title track and their B-side Come Over on music shows. In terms of live vocals, for Hot, every single stage except one featured live vocals. In these stages, you can hear them quite well. In these stages, the backing track is quite overpowering, but it's still decidedly live, and in this stage, it is entirely pre-recorded. On the other hand, for their B-side Come Over, every single stage was entirely pre-recorded. Their vocal performance for Hot was definitely a bit of a step up from what we saw at Coachella, as each member seemed to easily be able to deliver their lines in a satisfying manner. Obviously, there's still some imperfections here and there, but they're in the correct pitch and it is overall quite pleasant to listen to. Hot did also take home the win on KBS's Music Bank on March 25th, giving us the first encore since the whole Coachella scandal. The encore would go on to be widely praised by fans, with many pointing out the improvements the members have made, especially members Kajua and Eunchae. And I 100% agree, this encore is better than a lot they've showcased previously. The most stable member is Chaewon. Yoonjin is close behind, though she did have some pitch issues, especially during the chorus. In my opinion, Kazua is hands down the member who has improved the most, not just from Coachella but in general, as she sounds quite stable and is overall able to project quite well throughout the entire encore. Eunchae and Sakura do still sound a little shaky, and while some fans and of course also critics did point this out, it doesn't change the fact that the reception of this encore was largely positive. Credit where credit is due, with this encore and this era, LE SSERAFIM has finally shown real improvement in their vocal capabilities. Looking back on everything LE SSERAFIM has been through in their relatively short time as a group, from the school bullying scandal to the relentless vocal criticism culminating in a brutal hate train in the aftermath of Coachella, I think it's become clear that this goes beyond the group itself. The story I've tried to tell in this video is a terrifying example of how multiple forces within the K-pop ecosystem can converge to create something far worse and more damaging than simple critique. While LE SSERAFIM was one of the most anticipated debuts of the entirety of the fourth generation, they also stepped right into an environment ready to pounce the moment they misstepped. LE SSERAFIM debuted under one of the most powerful corporations within K-pop, with a strong visual identity and already highly experienced members on the team, but they also stepped into an environment filled with unresolved tensions. From fans having grown skeptical towards HYBE's seemingly ever-expanding monopoly within the industry, to a cesspool of fandoms ready to tear them down to further their own favorite groups and idols, it was clear from day one that there was a faction of the broader K-pop audience who were already waiting for them to fail. Much of the backlash towards the group ultimately isn't even about something they did wrong, it is about what they represented. Netizens turned what started as valid criticism into weaponized narratives where even the smallest misstep became springboards for stans to further their own agendas in competition with other groups. On top of that, LE SSERAFIM's own fans did contribute to the problem by, for lack of a better term, overhyping the group. This came in the form of fans gushing over Sakura and Chaewon and their experience in the industry, and them dubbing Yoonjin an opera singer despite her never having received classical vocal training, just to mention some examples. This kind of exaggerated praise, though it obviously came from a place of love and support, made the group even more vulnerable when the reality simply wasn't able to meet the rhetoric. What really began as shared excitement turned into unrealistic expectations. And when these expectations were not met, people didn't simply just critique them. There seemed to be some sense of betrayal, and from this, resentment began to fester. But I believe and hope that LE SSERAFIM's story is moving past being just a cautionary tale. Despite everything, the group has in more recent eras shown signs of actual growth, reflecting a willingness to actually take criticism to heart and work on it to become better artists. Public perception has in large began to shift, not because they've suddenly become perfect, but because they've started to show actual growth as artists. The backlash they received was honestly the result of a perfect storm, consisting of industry negligence, stand-driven pressure, over-exaggerated hype, and a toxic online culture that often seems to value spectacle over sincerity. The hope is that their journey so far can work as a reminder for fans, companies, and artists alike that hype alone cannot replace hard work, and criticism without compassion and boundaries will always miss the point. In an industry as judgmental and fiercely competitive as K-pop, there will always be people ready to tear down anyone who rises too fast or shines too brightly. But as long as the sserafim keeps working towards actual growth, they will keep earning respect where it matters the most. If they stay on the trajectory they've shown in recent months, they may very well be able to turn one of the biggest hate trains in K-pop history into one of its most powerful stories of redemption.